The clockmaker's shop smelled of brass shavings and lamp oil when the first shadow appeared in Georgia Grayson's left eye, a dark spot that floated across her vision like a piece of ash from the wood stove her father kept burning in the corner of his workshop in Pioche, Nevada. It was late autumn of 1878, and Georgia had just turned 22 years old. She stood at her workbench, a magnifying glass pressed close to her face, as she attempted to fit a delicate spring into the mechanism of a pocket watch that belonged to the mayor. The shadow drifted across the watch face, and she blinked hard, trying to clear it away. When it remained, a cold fear settled in her stomach, but she said nothing to her father. Samuel Grayson was already worried enough about the mine closures affecting their business. Half the miners in Pioche had left for better prospects in California, taking their broken timepieces with them. Georgia finished the repair that afternoon, though it took her twice as long as usual. Her fingers, normally so steady and precise, trembled as she worked. By evening, the shadow had grown larger, and a second one had appeared in her right eye. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her small room above the shop, watching the darkness spread like spilled ink across her vision. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of endless night. The town doctor, a gruff man named Henderson, who spent more time treating mining injuries than anything else, examined her eyes 3 days later. He pulled down her lower lids, shone a lamp into her pupils, and asked her to read letters from a chart on the wall. When he finished, he removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Georgia would come to recognize as a man stalling before delivering bad news. "Your retinas are detaching," he said finally. "Both eyes. I've seen this condition perhaps twice in my career, and I have never seen it reversed. You will lose your sight, Miss Grayson. Likely within 6 months, possibly sooner." The words hit her like a physical blow. Georgia gripped the arms of the wooden chair, her knuckles white. "There must be something you can do, some treatment, some surgery." Dr. Henderson shook his head. "Not here, not anywhere I know of. There are specialists back east who study diseases of the eye, but even they cannot repair what is happening inside yours. I am sorry, truly." Her father took the news worse than she did. Samuel Grayson had lost his wife to cholera when Georgia was only 8 years old, and his daughter had become his whole world. She had learned the clockmaker's trade at his side, her small fingers proving even more nimble than his own. Now he sat at his workbench, a half-assembled clock forgotten before him, tears streaming down his weathered face. "We will find someone," he said hoarsely. "We will go to San Francisco, to Sacramento. There are doctors there, better doctors." But Georgia knew better. She had seen the certainty in Dr. Henderson's eyes. The shadows in her vision grew darker each day, spreading like storm clouds across a summer sky. Within 2 weeks, she could no longer thread a needle. Within a month, she could not read the numbers on a clock face. The intricate mechanisms she had spent years learning to repair became impossible to see, let alone fix. The loss of her sight meant the loss of her identity. She had been the clockmaker's daughter, the girl with steady hands and sharper eyes than anyone in Pioche. Now she was becoming something else, something she did not yet have words for. The townspeople meant well with their sympathy, but their pitying glances felt like tiny cuts. She stopped going to the mercantile, stopped attending church socials, stopped doing anything that required her to face the world that was slowly disappearing. By February of 1879, Georgia could see only vague shapes and shadows. Colors had faded to grays. She learned to navigate the shop by memory and touch, counting steps from her bedroom door to the workbench, from the workbench to the stove. Her father hired a woman named Mrs. Chen to help with cooking and cleaning, but Georgia hated the dependence, hated the way her life had contracted to the 4 walls of the shop. It was Mrs. Chen who first mentioned Rourke Dalton, though not by name. "There's a man who comes to town for supplies," she said one morning as she helped Georgia button her dress. "Big fellow, lives up in the Ruby Mountains. He brought in a wolf pelt yesterday, prettiest thing I ever saw. Silver and black, must have been from a timber wolf." Georgia nodded absently, not particularly interested in mountain men or wolf pelts. She had met plenty of trappers and prospectors in her life. They were rough, uneducated men who smelled of campfire smoke and animal fat, men who spent months alone in the wilderness and forgot how to speak like civilized people. But 3 days later, The bell above the shop door chimed, and Georgia heard her father greet someone in a voice that held an unusual note of respect. "Mr. Dalton, welcome. What can I do for you today?" "This watch stopped keeping time about a week back." The voice was deep and rumbling, like distant thunder over the mountains. "Figured I'd better bring it in before I lose track of the days entirely." Georgia sat in the corner of the shop, her hands folded in her lap, trying to be invisible. Since losing her sight, she felt awkward around customers, unsure of where to look or how to comport herself. "Let me take a look," her father said. There was a pause, the sound of metal on wood as he examined the piece. "The mainspring is broken. I can fix it, but it will take a few days. I will need to order the part from Carson City." "That is fine. I'm in no hurry." "You came all the way down from your camp for this?" "Among other things. Needed flour and coffee, some ammunition. Thought I would take care of everything at once." Georgia heard her father move across the shop, his footsteps familiar and comforting. "Mr. Dalton, I wonder if I might ask you something." "Ask away." "My daughter Georgia." Her father's voice dropped lower, but Georgia's hearing had sharpened as her sight faded. She heard every word. "She is losing her vision, nearly blind now. She has not left this shop in months, barely leaves her room some days. I worry about her, Mr. Dalton. I worry that she's giving up on life." Georgia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. How dare her father discuss her condition with a stranger, with a mountain man who probably could not even write his own name? "What would you have me do about it?" Rourke Dalton's voice held no mockery, only genuine curiosity. "I do not rightly know. But I see you sometimes, watching the world like you're trying to memorize every detail. My daughter used to look at things that way, back when she could see. She noticed everything, could describe a sunset or a flower with such precision you would swear you were seeing it through her eyes. I thought maybe you could talk to her, tell her about the things you see up in the mountains. Remind her that the world is still out there, even if she cannot see it anymore." There was a long silence. Georgia held her breath, mortification warring with a strange, unexpected curiosity. What kind of man was this that her father would make such an unusual request? "I am not much for talking," Rourke said finally, "but I will try if you think it would help." Before Georgia could protest, before she could flee to her room and lock the door, she heard heavy footsteps approaching. A chair scraped across the wooden floor, and she sensed someone sitting down near her. The air changed, became charged with a presence she could not quite define. "Miss Grayson," the deep voice said, "my name is Rourke Dalton. Your father seems to think I might be able to tell you about the mountains." "I do not need your pity," Georgia said sharply, "or your charity." "Good, because I am not offering either." There was no offense in his tone, just plain statement of fact. "I'm offering a description of what I saw on my way into town this morning, if you care to hear it. If you do not, I will leave you in peace." Georgia wanted to tell him to go away, to take his pity and his descriptions and leave her alone. But something in his voice stopped her. He did not sound like he was talking to an invalid or someone to be pitied. He sounded like he was talking to an equal. "What did you see?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "The sun was just coming up when I left my camp," Rourke began. "The sky in the east was the color of ripe peaches, all orange and pink and gold. The mountains were still dark, silhouetted against that bright sky like the jagged edge of a torn piece of paper. There was frost on the ground, white as fresh cream, and every blade of grass was coated with it. When the sunlight hit that frost, it sparkled like someone had scattered diamonds across the meadow." Georgia found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the cadence of his words. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if choosing each word with care. "There was a hawk circling overhead," he continued. "A red-tailed hawk, I think, though it was hard to tell against the bright sky. Its wings were spread wide, and it was riding the air currents, barely moving except for small adjustments of its tail feathers. It was hunting, looking for rabbits or mice in the grass below. I watched it for probably 10 minutes before it dove, fast as lightning, and came up with something in its talons. Then it flew off toward the cliffs to the east." He paused, and Georgia heard the creak of his chair as he shifted his weight. "The creek that runs down from the mountains is running clear and fast right now, fed by snowmelt. You can see straight to the bottom in most places, see the smooth river rocks and the small fish darting between them. The water is so cold it makes your teeth ache if you drink it too fast, but it tastes clean and sweet, better than any well water. Georgia sat very still, her useless eyes fixed in what she hoped was his general direction. She could picture everything he described, could almost feel the cold mountain air on her face. "The aspens are bare now," Rourke went on, "but their trunks are white as birch bark, and they stand out against the dark pines like fence posts. In the summer, their leaves turn silver when the wind blows through them, and it sounds like rain even on a clear day. I think they might be my favorite trees for that reason." "Why?" Georgia asked softly. "Why are they my favorite?" "No. Why are you doing this?" She heard him take a breath, let it out slowly. "Because your father asked me to, and because I know what it is like to feel cut off from the world. I spent 2 years up in those mountains after the war, barely speaking to another soul. I forgot what it was like to be human for a while. Someone helped me remember, and I figure maybe I can do the same for you in a different way. I am not some charity case that needs saving." "No," he agreed. "You are a woman who is losing her sight. That's a hard thing, maybe the hardest thing. But you are not dead, Miss Grayson, and the world did not disappear just because you cannot see it anymore." His words were blunt, almost harsh, but Georgia found herself grateful for them. Everyone else treated her like she was made of spun glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. This man, this stranger, spoke to her like she was still whole. "Tell me more," she said. And he did. For the next hour, Rourke Dalton sat in that chair and described the world outside the clockmaker's shop. He told her about the way snow clung to the northern sides of pine trees, about the tracks of a mountain lion he had seen near his camp, about the color of the evening sky when a storm was rolling in from the west. He described things with such detail and precision that Georgia could see them in her mind, vivid and clear. When he finally stood to leave, Georgia felt a strange sense of loss. "Will you come back?" she asked, hating the neediness in her voice but unable to stop herself. "I come to town about once a month for supplies," Rourke said. "I will stop by the shop when I do if you would like." "I would," Georgia admitted. "I would like that very much." She heard him walk toward the door, heard the bell chime as he opened it. Then his footsteps paused. "Miss Grayson," he said, "the world needs describing, and you seem like someone who knows how to listen." Then he was gone, and Georgia sat alone in the shop, her fingers twisted in her skirt, her mind full of red-tailed hawks and frost-covered meadows and aspens that sounded like rain. Her father came over a few minutes later and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What do you think of him?" "I think," Georgia said slowly, "that he sees the world the way I used to. Before." "He's a good man," her father said. "Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but good." That night, Georgia dreamed of mountains she had never seen, of hawks circling in a peach-colored sky. When she woke, the darkness in her eyes was complete. The last of her vision had slipped away during the night like water through cupped hands. She should have felt devastated, should have wept at the final loss. Instead, she found herself thinking about Rourke Dalton's description of the frost sparkling like diamonds, and she smiled. The next month seemed to crawl by. Georgia learned to navigate the shop and her room with increasing confidence, her fingers reading the surfaces around her like braille. Mrs. Chen taught her to identify herbs and spices by smell, to crack eggs one-handed, to fold laundry by feel. Her father read to her in the evenings from the newspaper and from books, though his voice often grew hoarse after an hour or two. But Georgia found herself waiting, counting the days until Rourke Dalton might return to town. She told herself it was foolish, that she had only spoken to the man once, that he probably would not even remember his promise. Mountain men were not known for their reliability. He might have been killed by a bear, or moved on to better trapping grounds, or simply decided that talking to a blind woman was not worth his time. But on a cold morning in early March, the shop bell chimed, and she heard that deep, rumbling voice again. "Mr. Grayson, I came for my watch." "Mr. Dalton, welcome." Her father sounded genuinely pleased. "I have it right here, good as new. The spring came in from Carson City last week." There was the sound of coins on the counter, the click of a watch case opening and closing. Georgia sat at a small table near the window, pretending to be busy with a basket of buttons she was sorting by size and shape. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Is your daughter around?" Rourke asked, his voice casual. "Right over there by the window. Georgia, Mr. Dalton is here." Georgia turned toward the sound of his voice, hoping her face was pointed in approximately the right direction. "Mr. Dalton, did you bring me another description? If you want one. Please." She heard him walk across the shop and settle into the same chair as before. This time, she noticed details she had missed the first time. He smelled of pine smoke and leather, of cold air, and something else she could not quite identify. Some kind of soap, maybe, or just the clean scent of someone who spent his days outdoors. "The mountains are deep in snow now," Rourke began. "Must be 4 or 5 feet up where my camp is, deeper in the drifts. It changes the whole landscape, smooths out all the rough edges and makes everything look soft and round. The pine trees are so heavy with snow that their branches hang down almost to the ground, like they are bowing under the weight." Georgia closed her eyes, the better to see his words. "I saw a pack of wolves last week," he continued. 5 of them, moving through the trees like smoke. Their fur was thick and winter-full, mostly gray with some black and white mixed in. They were hunting elk, working together in a way that was almost like watching a dance. 2 of them would circle around to drive the elk toward the others, and they would take turns running it down, wearing it out. It took them almost an hour, but they finally brought down a big cow. It is brutal, watching a kill like that, but it is also beautiful in its way. Everything has its place in the mountains, its purpose. "Were you afraid?" Georgia asked, "being that close to wolves?" "No. They know I am not a threat to them, and I am too big to be prey. We have an understanding, the wolves and I. I do not bother them, and they do not bother me." "What else did you see?" Rourke was quiet for a moment, and Georgia wondered if she had asked too much, if he was going to leave. But then he spoke again, his voice softer than before. "There's a place about a mile from my camp where the creek widens out into a pool. The water is deep there, maybe 6 or 7 feet, and usually it is full of trout. But right now, it is frozen solid. The ice is so clear you can see straight through it to the creek bed below, can see the rocks and the fallen branches and even some fish, frozen in place like they are swimming through glass. When the sun hits that ice just right, it glows blue, this deep cold blue like the heart of a sapphire." Georgia drew in a breath. "That sounds beautiful." "It is. I thought about you when I saw it, thought about how I would describe it if you asked." Something in his words made her chest tighten. "You thought about me?" "I did." He said it simply, without embarrassment. "You're easy to talk to, Miss Grayson. Most people want me to hurry up and get to the point, but you listen like every word matters." "Every word does matter," Georgia said. "You are my eyes now. Mr. Dalton, you show me things I cannot see anymore. Then I will try to show you worthy things." He stayed for another hour, describing the way ice formed in patterns on the windows of his cabin, the sound of tree branches cracking under the weight of snow, the tracks of a lynx he had followed for 3 miles just to see where it led. When he finally left, Georgia felt the same sense of loss as before, but this time it was mixed with anticipation. He would come back. She knew he would. Over the following months, Rourke Dalton became a fixture in Georgia's life. He came to town regularly, always stopping at the Clockmaker's shop, always sitting in that same chair to describe the world to her. He brought her things from the mountains, smooth river stones that fit perfectly in her palm, a bird's nest woven from grass and moss, a piece of pine bark that still smelled of sap. Each gift was something she could experience through touch and smell, something that made his descriptions more real. Georgia began to look forward to his visits with an intensity that surprised her. She found herself listening for the shop bell, for the sound of his heavy footsteps, for that deep voice that painted pictures in her mind. And slowly, without quite meaning to, she began to learn about the man behind the descriptions. Rourke Dalton was 30 years old, a veteran of the Civil War who had fought for the Union. He had returned from the war haunted and angry, unable to settle back into civilian life. He had drifted west, working odd jobs, drinking too much, getting into fights. Finally, he had retreated into the Ruby Mountains, built himself a cabin, and spent 2 years alone with his demons. "A trapper named John Holloway found me one winter," Rourke told her one afternoon in May. "I was half starved, half crazy, more animal than man. He could have left me to die, probably should have. But he brought me back to his camp, fed me, talked to me until I remembered how to talk back. He taught me how to trap, how to read the mountains, how to survive. More than that, he reminded me that I was still human, still worth something. "Where is he now?" Georgia asked. "Dead. Caught pneumonia 3 winters back. I buried him up on a ridge that overlooks the valley. He would have liked the view. I'm sorry. So am I. But he saved my life, and I figure the best way to honor that is to keep living it well. That is why I started coming to town more often, started talking to people again. John used to say that we are not meant to live alone, that we need each other to remember who we are." Georgia reached out, found his hand resting on the arm of the chair, and squeezed it gently. "He sounds like a wise man." He was. Rourke turned his hand over, his rough fingers closing around hers. "And he would have liked you, I think. He appreciated people who could see beauty in small things." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, neither of them speaking. Georgia felt something shift between them, something unspoken but unmistakable. This was more than a mountain man doing a favor for a blind woman. This was something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat. But she was also afraid. What could she offer a man like Rourke Dalton? She was blind, dependent, useless. He deserved someone whole, someone who could walk beside him in those mountains he loved so much, who could see the wolves and the frozen creek and the aspens turning silver in the wind. As if reading her thoughts, Rourke said quietly, "You're thinking too hard, Georgia. I can hear it in your breathing." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent a shiver through her. "I was just wondering why you keep coming back here, to see me. Do you want the truth?" "Always. Because you make me want to see the world more carefully. Before I met you, I would walk through the mountains and notice things, but I did not really look at them, not the way I do now. Now I'm always watching, always thinking about how I would describe something to you. It has made everything more vivid, more real. You have given me a gift, Georgia, even if you do not know it." "I have given you nothing," she protested. "You are the one who brings me the world. You give me a reason to pay attention to it." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gentle gesture that made her throat tighten. "And you make me want to be someone worth talking to, a man who can find the right words, who can share something meaningful. You already are that man. Maybe, but I am better at it with you." That night, after Rourke had left and her father had gone to bed, Georgia sat at her window and ran her fingers over the smooth riverstone he had brought her months ago. She thought about his words, about the way he saw her not as broken or diminished, but as someone who had changed his life for the better. It was a heady feeling, intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She was falling in love with him. She had been falling in love with him for months, probably since that first day when he had described frost sparkling like diamonds. But love seemed like a luxury she could not afford, a risk too great to take. What if he left? What if he realized that a blind woman was too much trouble, too much responsibility? What if her father died, and she had no one to care for her? The fears circled through her mind like wolves, but beneath them was something stronger. Hope. The fragile, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, Rourke Dalton felt the same way she did. Summer arrived, turning Pioche into an oven. The heat baked the streets until they shimmered, and dust hung in the air like fog. George's father struggled with the heat more than usual, his breathing labored, his movements slow. Dr. Henderson diagnosed a weak heart and prescribed rest, but Samuel Grayson was not a man who knew how to rest. He continued to work in the shop, repairing watches and clocks, though Georgia could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Rourke's visits became more frequent. He came to town every 2 weeks now, sometimes more often. He would sit with Georgia in the shop or, when the heat became unbearable, on the small porch behind the building where a bit of shade could be found. His descriptions changed with the season. He told her about meadows full of wildflowers, about thunderstorms that rolled through the mountains with lightning that struck the high peaks, about the way the air smelled after rain, clean and electric and alive. "I wish I could show you," he said one afternoon in late July. They were sitting on the porch, sharing a jar of cool water. Mrs. Chen had drawn from the well. "I wish I could take you up into the mountains and let you feel it all for yourself." "I would like that," Georgia said wistfully. But it is impossible. I cannot even walk down the street without help. How could I possibly manage a mountain trail? You could if I was with you. Rourke's voice was serious, thoughtful. I could guide you, keep you safe. You could touch the trees, feel the wind, hear the creek. It would not be the same as seeing it, but it would be something. The idea was tempting, dangerously so. My father would never allow it. A blind woman, alone in the mountains with a man? It would be scandalous. Then we will make it proper. We will get married first. The words hung in the hot air between them. George's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. What did you say? I said we will get married. Rourke reached over and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. If you will have me, Georgia, I know I'm not much. I live in a cabin with no floor. I spend half my time covered in dirt and blood from trapping, and I'm probably too old and too rough for a woman like you. But I love you. I have loved you since the day I first heard you ask for another description, like my words were precious things worth holding on to. I want to spend my life showing you the world, bringing you every beautiful thing I can find, being the eyes you lost, if you will let me. Georgia could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the solid warmth of his hand and the sincerity in his voice. You love me? With everything I have. But I'm blind. I'm useless, broken. You could have anyone, someone who could see, someone whole. You are not broken, Rourke said fiercely. You are the strongest person I know. You lost your sight, and you did not give up, did not stop being who you are, and I do not want anyone else. I want you, Georgia Grayson. I want to marry you and take you to the mountains and spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how much this world has to offer. Will you say yes? Tears spilled down Georgia's cheeks, hot and fast. She had cried so much when she first lost her sight, tears of grief and anger and despair. But these were different. These were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so intense it hurt. Yes, she whispered, yes, I will marry you. Rourke made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling for the first time the solid strength of him, the broad shoulders and muscled arms she had only heard described by others. He was exactly as she had imagined, strong, protective, safe. I will take care of you, he murmured into her hair. I swear it, Georgia. I will be your eyes and your strength and anything else you need. And I will be your reason to keep looking, she whispered back, your reason to see the beauty in everything. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the summer heat pressed down around them and the future stretched out bright and full of possibility. Samuel Grayson wept when they told him. He embraced Rourke like a son and held George's face between his hands, his own face wet with tears. I could not ask for a better man to care for my daughter, he said. You have my blessing, Mr. Dalton, and my gratitude. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the end of Main Street. Georgia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. Mrs. Chen wove wildflowers into her hair, and Dr. Henderson gave her away since her father was too overcome with emotion to walk steadily. Georgia could not see the church or the guests or even Rourke's face as he stood waiting for her at the altar, but she did not need to. She could feel his presence, hear the rough catch in his voice as he spoke his vows, feel the gentle slide of the gold ring onto her finger. I promise to show you the world, he said, his words only for her. Every day, every moment we have together. You will never be alone in the darkness, Georgia. I will always be there to describe the light. And I promise to listen, she whispered back, to see through your eyes and love through your heart. You are my world now, Rourke Dalton. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. When the small congregation applauded, Georgia smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. They spent their wedding night in a room above the saloon, the only place in Pioche that resembled a hotel. Rourke was gentle with her, patient and careful, guiding her hands to touch his face, his chest, letting her learn the shape and feel of him before they came together as husband and wife. It was awkward and tender and beautiful all at once, and when it was over, Georgia lay in his arms and felt more whole than she had in years. Tell me what you look like, she said softly, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I have never asked, but I want to know." Rourke was quiet for a moment. "I'm not much to look at. My hair is brown and too long, almost to my shoulders. I have a scar through my left eyebrow from a bar fight years back. My nose has been broken twice and did not set quite straight either time. I'm too big, too rough around the edges." "You are beautiful to me," Georgia said firmly. "Now tell me properly, what color are your eyes?" "Blue, dark blue, like deep water." "And your hair, is it straight or curly?" "Somewhere in between. Wavy, I guess you would call it. Gets even more wavy when it is wet." Georgia ran her fingers through his hair, feeling the thick, slightly coarse texture of it. "I like it. What else?" "I have broad shoulders. Lots of muscle from working with axes and traps. Scars all over from various accidents and fights. Calluses on my hands thick enough to use for shoe leather." He caught one of her hands and pressed it against his chest. "This is me, Georgia. Nothing fancy, nothing refined. Just a mountain man who loves you more than anything." "That's all I need," she said, and kissed him again. 3 days later, they left Pioche. Samuel Grayson had initially protested, not wanting his daughter to leave him, but Georgia was firm. "This is my life now, Papa. Rourke and I will visit often, I promise. But I need to do this. I need to see the world he has been describing to me." Her father finally relented, though he clung to her for a long moment before letting her go. "Be happy, my girl. That's all I ask." "I will be," Georgia promised. "I already am." The journey to Rourke's cabin took 2 days. He had brought a gentle mare for Georgia to ride, a horse so placid and steady that even a blind woman could manage her. Rourke led the horse by a rope, guiding them through terrain that Georgia could not see but could feel. The flatlands around Pioche giving way to rocky foothills, the air growing thinner and cooler as they climbed. Rourke described everything as they rode. He told her about the color of the rocks, the shape of the clouds, the way the sagebrush gave way to juniper and then to pine. He described a golden eagle soaring overhead, a mule deer watching them from a distance, a cluster of butterflies gathered around a puddle left from a recent rain. "The butterflies are orange and black," he said. "Their wings are moving slowly, like they are breathing. When the sunlight hits them just right, you can see every vein and pattern on the wings. They are so delicate, you feel like a strong wind could tear them apart, but they keep flying anyway. Tough little things." Georgia smiled, her face turned toward the warmth of the sun. "I can picture them perfectly." They stopped for the night in a meadow surrounded by pines. Rourke built a fire and made a simple meal of salt pork and beans, then spread out bedrolls near the flames. Georgia sat wrapped in a blanket, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant call of an owl. "This is the sound of my world," Rourke said, settling down beside her. "Fire and wind and animals calling to each other. At first it drove me half mad, all that silence broken only by wild things. Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "I understand why," Georgia said. "It feels different up here, cleaner somehow, like everything is exactly as it is supposed to be." "That is exactly it." Rourke put his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth. "There is no pretense in the mountains. Things are what they are, no more, no less. It is honest country." They made love under the stars that night, and afterward, Rourke described the sky to her. He pointed out constellations she could not see, told her about the Milky Way stretched out like a river of light, about a shooting star that blazed across the darkness and disappeared. "Make a wish," he told her. "I do not need to," Georgia said. "I have everything I want right here." The cabin was smaller than Georgia had imagined, but it felt solid and well built. Rourke guided her through it, letting her touch the log walls, the iron stove, the rough wooden table and chairs he had built himself. There was a bed with a real mattress stuffed with pine needles and moss, shelves for supplies, hooks for hanging clothes and tools. A single window faced east, catching the morning sun. "It is not much," Rourke said, a note of apology in his voice, "but it is dry and warm, and I can make improvements. I will build a proper floor, maybe add a second room." "It is perfect," Georgia said honestly. "It smells like you, like pine and smoke. It feels like home." Over the following weeks, Georgia learned to navigate her new world. Rourke guided her around the clearing where the cabin stood, helping her memorize the locations of the woodpile, the creek, the outhouse, the root cellar where they stored food. He taught her to recognize sounds and smells, the rustle of a squirrel in the trees, the musky scent of elk, the particular way the wind sounded just before a storm. And every day, he described things to her. He described the way morning mist rose from the creek like smoke, the pattern of bark on the pines, the exact shade of green in a hummingbird's feathers. He brought her plants to smell and touch, rocks with interesting textures, feathers from different birds. He made the mountains real for her in ways that went beyond sight. But more than that, he made her feel capable. He did not coddle her or treat her like she was fragile. When she struggled to learn a new task, he encouraged her but did not do it for her. When she burned herself on the stove, he treated the wound and then told her to try again, more carefully this time. He expected her to contribute, to help with cooking and mending and other chores she could manage without sight. "You are my partner," he told her one afternoon as they worked together to prepare animal hides for tanning. "Not my burden. We share this life, Georgia. That means we both pull our weight." Georgia loved him for that more than anything. He saw her as whole, as capable, as someone with value beyond what she had lost. Autumn arrived, painting the mountains in colors Georgia could only imagine. Rourke described the aspens turning gold, the scrub oaks shifting to red and orange, the way the whole landscape seemed to glow in the slanting sunlight. He took her on walks, guiding her carefully over rocky trails, stopping frequently to let her feel the texture of a leaf or smell the sharp scent of pine sap. One afternoon, they hiked to the frozen pool he had described to her over a year ago. The ice had melted, of course, and now the pool was clear and cold, fed by the creek tumbling down from higher elevations. "The water is so clear you can see straight to the bottom," Rourke said, his arm around her waist as they stood at the edge. "There are trout swimming down there, maybe a dozen of them. They are golden brown with red spots along their sides. When they move, the sunlight catches their scales, and they almost seem to glow." "Can I feel the water?" Georgia asked. Rourke guided her to a flat rock and helped her kneel down. She dipped her hand into the pool and gasped at the icy shock of it. But beneath the cold was a sense of clarity, of purity. This water had never been touched by human hands except hers. It was as wild and untamed as the mountains themselves. "I wish I could see it," she said softly. "I know." Rourke knelt beside her, his hand covering hers in the water. "But you can feel it and smell it and hear it. That is something." "It is everything," Georgia said, "because you are here with me." They stayed at the pool for over an hour. Rourke described the way sunlight played on the water's surface, the shadows of the fish moving below, the pattern of ripples when the breeze disturbed the surface. He told her about the ring of pines surrounding the pool, the red cliff face rising behind it, the hawk that landed in a dead tree and watched them with fierce golden eyes. When they finally headed back to the cabin, Georgia felt a deep sense of contentment. This was her life now. These mountains, this man, this strange new way of seeing the world through another's eyes. It was different from what she had imagined for herself, but it was also richer, deeper, more meaningful than anything she had known before. Winter came hard and fast that year. Snow began falling in late October and did not stop for 3 days. Georgia woke on the 4th morning to a profound silence, the kind of quiet that only comes when the world is buried in snow. "How deep is it?" she asked as Rourke built up the fire. 3 feet, maybe more. We are snowed in for a while unless I shovel a path, but there's no hurry. We have supplies enough for months." Being snowed in should have felt like a prison, but instead, it felt intimate and cozy. The cabin became their whole world, a small sphere of warmth and light surrounded by cold and darkness. They cooked together, mended clothes together, told each other stories from their childhoods. Rourke read to her from the few books he owned, and Georgia taught him the songs her mother had sung to her as a child. At night, they lay tangled together in the bed, the wind howling outside, and Rourke described the winter world to her. He told her about the way snow transformed the landscape, softening every edge and muffling every sound. He described the icicles hanging from the cabin's eaves, some as long as his arm, glittering like glass in the weak winter sun. He talked about the tracks of animals in the snow, rabbits and foxes, and once a single set of bear tracks passing close to the cabin before moving on. "The bear was big," he said. Probably a male, judging by the size of the tracks. He was probably looking for a place to den for the winter. I hope he found one. Do you ever get lonely up here? Georgia asked one night. Before I came, I mean. All those years alone. I did, Rourke admitted, especially at first. The silence was so loud it hurt, but after a while I got used to it. I started to prefer it even. People are complicated and messy. Mountains just are. They do not judge you or expect things from you. And now? He pulled her closer, his breath warm against her hair. Now I cannot imagine being alone again. You changed everything, Georgia. You made me want to be part of the world again, not just hiding from it. I did not do anything. You did all the work. You gave me a reason to do it. That is everything. Christmas came, and Rourke surprised Georgia with gifts he had been secretly working on for months. He had carved her a set of small wooden animals, a deer, a wolf, a hawk, a trout. Each one was perfectly detailed, smooth as silk under her exploring fingers. So you can hold the things I describe, he said, so they are real to you in another way. Georgia wept as she ran her fingers over each carving, tracing the curve of the deer's neck, the sharp edges of the hawk's beak, the sleek lines of the trout. They are beautiful. How long did this take you? A few months. I worked on them whenever you were asleep or busy with something else. I wanted them to be perfect. They are perfect. You are perfect. She pulled him down for a kiss, then pressed one of the carvings into his hand. Your turn. Tell me about this one. Rourke laughed. That's the wolf. See here, this is his head and these are his ears, pointed and alert. This is his body, lean and muscled. And here is his tail, curled slightly. I carved him mid-stride, like he's walking through the trees. If you look closely, you can feel the individual hairs I carved into his fur. Georgia explored the carving with her fingertips, marveling at the detail. I can feel them. Oh, Rourke, this is wonderful. I am glad you like it. I was not sure if carved wood could capture what I see in my head, but I wanted to try. Georgia spent hours with those carvings, learning every detail, matching them to Rourke's descriptions. They became treasures to her, physical reminders of a world she could no longer see but could still experience through touch and imagination. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts. By April, the creek was running high and fast with snowmelt, and the first wildflowers were pushing up through the damp earth. Rourke took Georgia outside every day now, guiding her on longer and longer walks, teaching her to navigate the terrain around the cabin by memory and feel. You are getting good at this, he said one afternoon, as she walked confidently from the cabin to the creek, using a walking stick to feel her way but needing little guidance. Soon you will not need me at all. I will always need you, Georgia said, just not in the way you think. She was learning to be independent in small ways, to manage tasks she had once thought impossible for a blind woman. She could cook a full meal without help, could fetch water from the creek, could even chop kindling if Rourke set up the wood properly. But more than that, she was learning to be at peace with her blindness, to see it not as a loss but as a different way of experiencing the world. I think I might be happy, she told Rourke one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. Or rather, Rourke watched while Georgia listened to his description. The sky is orange and pink and purple all at once, he said, like someone spilled paint across it. The sun is halfway behind the mountains now, just a bright semicircle of light. The clouds are glowing at the edges, outlined in gold. It is the kind of sunset that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself. I do believe, Georgia said. I believe in this, in us, in the life we are building together. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought losing my sight meant losing everything. But you showed me that I was wrong. I did not lose everything. I just had to learn to see differently. Rourke took her hand and pressed it to his lips. You are the strongest person I have ever known. I learned from the best, she said, and kissed him as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. In May, they made the journey back to Pioche to visit George's father. Samuel Grayson had aged noticeably in the months they had been gone, his movements slower, his breathing more labored. But he was overjoyed to see his daughter, and he embraced Rourke warmly. You look well, Georgia, he said, his hands framing her face. Happy, that's all I ever wanted for you. I am happy, Papa, happier than I ever thought possible. They stayed in Pioche for 2 weeks, helping Samuel with the shop and spending time with the few friends Georgia had left in town. Dr. Henderson examined her eyes and confirmed what she already knew. The damage was permanent and complete. But he also noted that she seemed healthier than before, stronger in spirit if not in sight. "Whatever you are doing up in those mountains agrees with you," he said. "Keep doing it." Mrs. Chen hugged Georgia tightly when they said goodbye. "You come back any time," she said. "Your father needs to see you, to know you are well." "I will," Georgia promised. "We both will." The journey back to the mountains felt like coming home. Georgia relaxed as soon as they left the noise and bustle of Pioche behind, as soon as the air grew cool and pine-scented. She belonged in the mountains now, belonged with Rourke in that small cabin at the edge of the world. Summer passed in a blur of long, warm days. Rourke taught Georgia to fish, guiding her hands to feel the tension in the line, the particular tug that meant a trout had taken the bait. She caught her first fish in June, a beautiful rainbow trout that Rourke said was nearly 2 feet long. They cooked it for dinner, and Georgia thought it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. "Because you caught it yourself," Rourke said. "Food always tastes better when you worked for it." They planted a small garden near the cabin, and Georgia helped tend it. She learned to identify plants by touch and smell, to tell the difference between a weed and a bean plant, to know when the tomatoes were ripe by the way they felt in her hand. It was satisfying work, concrete and immediate, and she loved the way the earth felt beneath her fingers. In August, they took a week-long trip deeper into the mountains, camping under the stars and exploring places Rourke had not visited in years. He described alpine meadows full of wildflowers, crystal-clear lakes that reflected the sky like mirrors, peaks so high they still held patches of snow even in the heat of summer. They saw elk and bighorn sheep, heard the bugling call of a bull elk in rut, watched a family of black bears from a safe distance. "The mother bear is huge," Rourke whispered as they crouched behind a boulder. "Maybe 400 pounds. She has 2 cubs with her, both about half her size. They are play fighting right now, tumbling over each other like puppies. The mother is watching them, but also keeping an eye on us. She knows we are here." "Should we leave?" Georgia whispered back. "In a minute. I want you to hear this." The cubs made small huffing sounds as they wrestled, and the mother bear made a low chuffing noise that might have been approval or warning. After a few minutes, the family moved on, disappearing into the trees. Rourke and Georgia sat quietly for a while longer, letting the moment settle over them. "Thank you," Georgia said softly, "for bringing me here, for showing me all of this. I know it is not easy, guiding a blind woman through the wilderness." "It is the easiest thing I have ever done," Rourke said, "because I love you, and I want you to experience everything this world has to offer. Your blindness does not change that. If anything, it makes me more determined to show you things, to make sure you miss as little as possible." Georgia turned and found his face with her hands, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the scar through his eyebrow, the rough stubble on his cheeks. "I love you, Rourke Dalton, more than I ever thought I could love anyone. And I love you, Georgia Dalton, more than these mountains, more than the sky, more than my own life." They kissed there in the wilderness, surrounded by pine and stone and endless blue sky, and Georgia felt complete in a way she had never felt before. Autumn came again, and with it news from Pioche. A letter arrived via a trapper passing through, informing them that Samuel Grayson had died peacefully in his sleep. The shop had been left to Georgia, along with what little money her father had saved. Georgia wept for days. Rourke held her through it all, letting her grieve, describing the changing aspens and the migrating birds and the first dusting of snow on the high peaks. His words were a comfort, a reminder that life continued even in the face of loss, that beauty persisted even through grief. "He was a good man," Rourke said one night as they lay in bed, Georgia's tears finally spent. "He raised a remarkable daughter, and he made sure she was cared for before he left. That is all any father can hope to do." "I should have been there," Georgia said hoarsely. "I should have been with him at the end. He would not have wanted you to see him that way. He wanted you to be happy, to live your life. That is what his letter said, was it not?" It was true. Samuel Grayson's final letter to his daughter had been full of love and pride, urging her to embrace her new life and not to mourn him overmuch. "Hey, I go to join your mother," he had written, "and I go knowing that you are loved and cared for. Be happy, my Georgia. That is my final wish." Georgia pressed her face into Rourke's chest and breathed in the familiar scent of him. "I am happy," she whispered. "Even with this grief, I am happy. Is that wrong?" "No. It means you are living fully, feeling everything. That is what it means to be alive." They stayed in the mountains that winter, snowed in once again. But this time, Georgia did not feel trapped or isolated. She felt safe, cocooned in warmth and love while the world outside raged with cold and wind. She thought of her father often, remembering his patience as he taught her the clockmaker's trade, his gentle hands guiding hers as she learned to fit tiny gears together. She mourned him, but she also celebrated the life he had lived and the love he had shown her. In February, Georgia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but it was not until she missed her second monthly flow that she was certain. She told Rourke one morning as they sat by the fire, his hand resting on her belly. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. Rourke went very still. Then he let out a whoop of joy that made Georgia laugh. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, kissing her face and neck and hands. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Georgia asked, though she could hear the answer in his voice. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely breathe. A child, Georgia. Our child." They spent the rest of the winter preparing. Rourke built a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it until there was not a single splinter. Georgia sewed blankets in tiny clothes, her fingers working by feel alone. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the world they would show their child. "Boy or girl, it does not matter," Rourke said, "as long as the baby is healthy." "And as long as the baby has your eyes," Georgia said. "I want our child to see the world the way you do, with wonder and attention. I want them to notice everything, to appreciate the beauty in small things." "They will have the best teacher," Rourke said, "a mother who sees more without sight than most people see with it." The baby was born in early September, delivered with the help of a midwife Rourke had brought from a settlement 2 days' ride away. It was a boy, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Samuel, after Georgia's father, with the middle name John for the trapper who had saved Rourke's life. Georgia held her son for the first time and wept with joy. She could not see his face, but she felt the weight of him, the warmth, the tiny fingers that gripped hers with surprising strength. Rourke described every detail, the shock of dark hair, the blue eyes that might change color, the button nose and rosebud mouth. "He is beautiful," Rourke said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you, Georgia. He has your face, your expressions." "Tell me everything," Georgia whispered. "I want to see him through your eyes." And Rourke did. Over the days and weeks that followed, he described every change in their son, every new expression and gesture. He described the way Samuel's eyes tracked movement, the way his mouth pursed when he was thinking, the way his tiny fists waved in the air when he was excited. He made Samuel real for Georgia in the same way he had made the mountains real, with words that painted vivid pictures in her mind. Motherhood was harder than Georgia had anticipated. She could not see when Samuel was hungry or wet or in need of comfort. She had to learn to read his cries, to distinguish between the cry that meant hunger and the one that meant pain or fear. But she learned, adapting as she always had, finding new ways to care for her son without sight. Rourke was an attentive father, always there to help but never taking over completely. He trusted Georgia to care for their son, to find her own way of mothering. And gradually, she did. She learned to nurse Samuel by feel, to change his diapers efficiently, to soothe him with songs and touch. She became confident in her abilities, proud of what she could do. The years passed quickly. Samuel grew into a curious, active toddler who loved exploring the world around him. Rourke taught him the names of plants and animals, showed him how to fish and track and survive in the mountains. But it was Georgia who taught him to see carefully, to notice details, to describe things with precision. "Tell Mama what you see," she would say when they sat on the porch together. And Samuel, eager to please, would tell her about the color of the sky, the shape of the clouds, the way the creek sparkled in the sunlight. His descriptions were simple at first, childish and unpolished, but as he grew, so did his ability to paint pictures with words. "You are teaching him to see the way I do," Rourke said one evening after Samuel had gone to bed. "He notices everything now. Yesterday, he spent 10 minutes watching a beetle crawl across a rock, describing every detail to me." "He has good teachers," Georgia said with a smile. "A father who sees the world with wonder, and a mother who has learned to see without eyes." When Samuel was 3, Georgia became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. But in the spring of 1884, she delivered a healthy baby girl. They named her Clara, after Rourke's mother, whom he had not seen since before the war. Clara was different from Samuel in temperament. Where he was active and adventurous, she was quiet and contemplative. She would sit for hours listening to the sounds around her, her small face serious and focused. As she grew, she became Georgia's constant companion, sitting beside her mother and learning to navigate the world by touch and sound. "She is like you," Rourke said one day as they watched Clara carefully make her way from the cabin to the creek, using a stick to guide her just as Georgia did. "She does not need eyes to see clearly. She is teaching herself to understand the world the way I do," Georgia said, "in case she ever needs those skills." But Clara's eyes remained sharp and clear. She saw everything, noticed everything, and like her brother, she learned to describe the world to her mother with increasing skill. The two children became Georgia's eyes in a different way than Rourke, their young voices full of excitement and wonder as they shared their discoveries. Life in the mountains settled into a comfortable rhythm. The seasons turned, each one bringing its own beauty and challenges. Rourke continued to trap and hunt, providing for his family. Georgia managed the household, cooking and cleaning and caring for the children. Together, they built a life that was rich and full, despite its simplicity. They made the journey to Peosha once or twice a year, staying in the old apartment above the Clockmaker's shop, which Georgia had kept even though she no longer worked there. The shop itself had been sold to a young watchmaker from Sacramento, but the living quarters remained hers. The children loved these trips to town, fascinated by the noise and bustle so different from their quiet mountain home. But they always returned to the mountains eagerly, relieved to escape the crowded streets and return to open spaces. The mountains were home, the only home the children had ever really known. When Samuel was 8 and Clara was 5, Rourke began teaching them both to read and write. He had a small collection of books and he used them to educate his children, determined that they would have opportunities he had never had. Georgia helped as she could, listening to their lessons and correcting their pronunciation, contributing her own knowledge of history and mathematics. "You should be a teacher," Rourke told her one evening after she had helped Samuel work through a difficult arithmetic problem. "You have a gift for explaining things clearly." "I am a teacher," Georgia said. "I teach our children every day. What more could I want?" But Rourke's words stayed with her. She began to think about other blind people, other women and men who had lost their sight and felt lost and alone as she once had. She wondered if there was a way to help them, to share what she had learned about navigating a sightless world. She mentioned the idea to Rourke, and he immediately supported it. "You could write a book," he suggested, "or a pamphlet at least, something that could be shared with people who are losing their sight, to give them hope and practical advice." Georgia loved the idea, but there was a problem. "I cannot write anymore. My handwriting was never good, and now that I cannot see what I'm putting on the page, it is illegible." "Then I will be your scribe," Rourke said. "You talk, I will write. We will do it together, the way we do everything." And so they did. Over the course of that winter, Georgia dictated her experiences while Rourke wrote them down in his careful, steady hand. She talked about the fear and grief of losing her sight, about the practical challenges of learning to navigate without vision, about the ways she had adapted and adjusted. But mostly, she talked about hope, about the beauty that still existed in the world, even for those who could not see it, about the importance of finding people who would describe that beauty, who would serve as eyes for those who had none. "Losing my sight was the hardest thing that ever happened to me," she dictated to Rourke one night. "But it was not the end of my life. In many ways, it was the beginning of a richer, deeper life than I had known before. I learned to see in new ways, to experience the world through touch and sound and smell. And I learned that love does not require sight, that connection with another person goes far deeper than what we can see with our eyes. When they finished, Rourke read the entire manuscript back to her. Georgia listened with tears streaming down her face, amazed at how much she had experienced, how much she had overcome. This was her story, her truth, and she hoped it would help others facing the same darkness she had faced. Rourke took the manuscript to Pioche on his next trip to town and arranged for it to be printed at the newspaper office. They made 100 copies, slim pamphlets bound in brown paper. Rourke left them at the doctor's office, at the church, at the mercantile, anywhere people might find them. And slowly, word spread. Letters began to arrive, forwarded through the Pioche post office. People who had lost their sight or whose family members were losing theirs wrote to thank Georgia for sharing her story. Some asked for advice, which she gladly gave, dictating responses for Rourke to write. Others simply wanted to share their own experiences, to connect with someone who understood what they were going through. Georgia was deeply moved by these letters. She had not realized how isolated she had felt in her blindness, even with Rourke's constant support, until she began connecting with others who shared her experience. It was healing in a way she had not expected, this exchange of stories and encouragement. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a young woman in Virginia City whose sight was failing due to the same condition Georgia had. She wrote of her despair, of her conviction that her life was over. Georgia dictated a long response, sharing her own journey and emphasizing that blindness was not an ending, but a transformation. "But you will learn to see in new ways," she wrote. "You will discover strengths you did not know you had. And if you are very fortunate, you will find someone who loves you enough to become your eyes, to describe the world with such care and detail that you can see it in your mind as clearly as you once saw it with your eyes. I found that person, and he saved my life. Not by taking care of me, but by helping me take care of myself, by believing I was still whole, still capable, still worthy of a full and beautiful life. You are worthy of that too. Never forget it." Months later, Georgia received another letter from the young woman. She had found a position teaching music to children, using her sense of touch and hearing to guide her students. She had also met a man, a carpenter who was patient and kind, who was learning to see the world through her experiences. She wrote that Georgia's words had given her the courage to keep living, to keep trying, to believe that her life still had meaning and purpose. "You saved me," the letter read, "just as your husband saved you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving me hope." Georgia wept when Rourke read that letter to her. She had not set out to save anyone, had only wanted to share her truth. But if her words could help even one person find their way through the darkness, then every moment of struggle had been worth it. The years continued to pass. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who was as comfortable in the wilderness as his father. He had Rourke's build and Georgia's careful attention to detail, and he dreamed of becoming a guide, leading people through the mountains and showing them the beauty his parents had shown him. Clara remained more bookish, more interested in ideas than physical adventure. She loved stories and spent hours reading to her mother, her clear voice bringing books to life. She talked about becoming a writer someday, creating stories that would transport people to other worlds. Rourke and Georgia watched their children grow with pride and wonder. They had built something remarkable here in the mountains, a family, a life, a legacy. And through it all, Rourke never stopped describing the world to Georgia. Even after 20 years of marriage, he still painted pictures with words every single day, still brought her the beauty of the mountains in vivid detail. "The sky tonight is full of stars," he said one evening in the summer of 1898. They sat on the porch of their cabin, which Rourke had expanded over the years to include 2 additional rooms and a real wooden floor. "There are so many stars you could not count them if you spent your whole life trying. They look like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The Milky Way cuts across the sky from north to south, this river of light so bright you can almost read by it. And there, just above the eastern horizon, is Mars. It is shining red tonight, brighter than any star." Georgia leaned against her husband's shoulder, content and at peace. You have shown me the whole world, Rourke Dalton. Not just the mountains, but everything. The beauty, the wonder, the meaning of it all. And you have shown me how to really see it, Rourke said. Before I met you, I looked at things but did not truly see them. You taught me to pay attention, to notice every detail, to appreciate every moment. You gave my life purpose, Georgia. We gave each other purpose, Georgia corrected. That is what love does. It completes us, makes us better than we were alone. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, hand in hand, while the stars wheeled overhead and the night sounds of the mountains surrounded them. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new moments to describe and share. But tonight, there was only this. Two people, deeply in love, watching the world together in their own unique way. Samuel eventually married a girl from Pioche, a sweet-natured young woman named Alice who adapted quickly to mountain life. They built a cabin near Rourke and Georgia's, close enough to visit easily but far enough for privacy. Samuel became a hunting guide as he had dreamed, leading wealthy men from back east on expeditions through the Ruby Mountains. He was good at it, patient and knowledgeable, and he made a comfortable living. Clara moved to Carson City to attend a small college there, one of the first women in Nevada to do so. She studied literature and writing, and she published her first story in a San Francisco magazine when she was 22. She wrote to her parents every week, long letters full of details about her studies and her life in the city. But she always came home for the summers, unable to stay away from the mountains for too long. They are both so much more than we ever were, Georgia said to Rourke one evening after receiving one of Clara's letters. They have opportunities we never dreamed of. Because we made those opportunities possible, Rourke said. We gave them a foundation of love and support. We taught them to see the world clearly and to believe in themselves. Everything they accomplish is built on what we gave them. You always know the right thing to say, Georgia said with a smile. I have had a lot of practice, 23 years of practice to be exact. Georgia reached for his hand, finding it unerringly even in the dark. Her ability to navigate by feel and memory had only improved with time, and she moved through her world with confidence now. Have they been good years, do you think? The best years of my life, Rourke said without hesitation. Every single one of them, even the hard ones, the ones with loss and grief and struggle. They were all worth it because I spent them with you. I love you, Rourke Dalton. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Georgia Dalton, my wife, my partner, my reason for seeing the world clearly. You are everything to me. They grew old together in those mountains, their hair turning gray, their movements slower, but no less purposeful. Rourke's descriptions never stopped, never became routine or perfunctory. He described every sunrise and sunset, every changing season, every small miracle of the natural world. And Georgia listened with the same attention and wonder she had shown from the very beginning. Their grandchildren came to visit, Samuel's children, and eventually Clara's as well. The cabin filled with noise and laughter, with the chaos of young lives. Georgia taught her grandchildren the same lessons she had taught her children, to see carefully, to describe precisely, to find beauty in unexpected places. And they adored their grandmother, this strong woman who navigated the world without sight, but somehow saw more than anyone else they knew. On a crisp autumn morning in 1912, when Georgia was 56 years old and Rourke was 64, they took a walk to the frozen pool where Rourke had taken her all those years ago. It was their tradition, visiting this special place every fall, watching the seasons turn and remembering the early days of their love. The aspens are gold today, Rourke said as they walked hand in hand along the familiar trail. Bright as coins against the dark pines. The air smells like snow, like winter is coming soon. And the sky is that particular shade of blue you only get in autumn, deep and clear and perfect. They reached the pool and sat on the same flat rock where Georgia had first dipped her hand in the icy water. The pool was not frozen yet, but it would be soon. The trout were still there, golden brown with red spots, swimming lazily in the clear water. Thank you, Georgia said softly. For what? For everything. For seeing me when I could not see myself. For describing the world with such love and care. For giving me a life beyond anything I imagined possible. for loving me when I thought I was unlovable." Rourke turned to her, and even though she could not see his face, she felt the intensity of his gaze. "You were never unlovable, Georgia. You were always extraordinary. I just recognized it before you did. You saved my life. And you saved mine. We saved each other, the way people do when they truly love." They sat together until the sun began to set, Rourke describing the changing colors of the sky, the way the light played on the water, the first stars appearing in the east. And when they finally walked back to the cabin, their steps were slow but steady, their hands clasped together, their hearts full of gratitude for every moment they had shared. The world continued to turn, seasons flowing one into the next like water in the creek. Rourke and Georgia grew older, their bodies failing in small ways, but their minds and spirits remaining sharp. And through it all, through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and loss, Rourke described the world to Georgia, and Georgia listened with her whole heart. She was the clockmaker's daughter who had lost her sight. He was the mountain man who had learned to see clearly, and together they had built a life more beautiful than any they could have imagined alone, a love that transformed darkness into light, absence into presence, loss into unexpected grace. Their story became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations. People spoke of the blind woman and her devoted husband, of the way he had described the world to her with such poetry and precision that she saw more without eyes than most people saw with them. They spoke of love that transcended limitation, of partnership that made both people stronger, of a life lived fully despite every obstacle. And when the end finally came, when Rourke passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 with Georgia holding his hand, she did not despair. She grieved, of course, wept for the loss of her greatest love, but she also celebrated the life they had built together, the children and grandchildren they had raised, the legacy of love and perseverance they were leaving behind. Georgia lived for another 7 years after Rourke's death, surrounded by family, cared for by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days sitting on the porch of the cabin, listening to the sounds of the mountains she had come to love. And sometimes, when the wind blew through the aspens just right, she swore she could hear Rourke's voice describing the world to her one more time. When Georgia finally joined her husband in 1927, she was 81 years old. She was buried next to him on a ridge overlooking the valley, in a spot with a view Rourke would have loved. Her gravestone was simple, bearing only her name and dates and a single line that Samuel had chosen. She saw the world through love. The cabin remained in the family for generations, a testament to the life Rourke and Georgia had built together. And sometimes, on quiet autumn evenings when the aspens turned gold and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, visitors to that cabin swore they could hear voices on the wind. A man's voice, deep and patient, describing the beauty of the mountains, and a woman's voice, soft and content, listening with her whole heart as the world unfolded in words more vivid than sight itself. It was a love story for the ages, born in darkness but lived in light, proof that the greatest beauty is often found not in what we see but in how we choose to see it. And for all the years they had together, through every season and every change, Rourke Dalton showed Georgia Dalton the world, and Georgia showed him how to truly see it. Together, they created something more precious than gold, more enduring than stone, a love that transcended every limitation and proved that the heart sees more clearly than any eyes ever could.